Now, our next speaker is someone I've really enjoyed collaborating with over the last few years. Unfortunately, he was elected to the board, so I don't know whether that changes our relationship, because now technically I suppose I might be answering to him at some point. But in the meantime, to the stage I would like to welcome the former financier who is now a philosopher. It's Breandan Ward. Breandan.
Good morning, everyone. So Neil and Claire showed me that the podium here is quite narrow. So I'm going to hand Neil my cane. If you start to see me veering off the side, you can
I'll catch you.
There you go.
Thank you, Breandan.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I add my welcomes to that of Finbar, that of Michael, that of Neil. Neil and I have been talking over the last few months about this topic of life changing. We just heard from Michael how over the last 39 years, fighting blindness has grown and continued to have significant impact. And when you think about that journey that we are all on, many of us have progressive sight loss. I've been losing my sight slowly but surely over the last 20 years. Some of us might have been blind at birth or from an early age. Some of us might have sight loss that was much more sudden, and our lives change. For those of you who have no sight issues at all, perhaps there's another disability that you're familiar with, or another health condition in your life or in your family's life, or perhaps there's just challenges like we just heard on the video. Regular challenges. Life changes, and how as individuals can we adapt? How can we thrive? That's the individual perspective, if you like, and today we'll be discovering that as individuals, how do we engage in the research process? How do we engage in advocacy and in the support that is so important? I would also say there's a collective element too, right? We have challenges as families, as communities, even as organizations. So life changes, nothing stays the same. And what I'd love to do is to use a different lens, just a lens of convenience, which is employment, to share a few reflections, because many of us have, like everyone else, career hopes. We have jobs, we have work outside of the consultant's room. And that can be a challenging space, a challenging place to enter employment if you have sight loss, challenging when you face barriers, discrimination. So that encounter in the world of employment really throws up a lot for us as people who have visual impairment. So I'd like to use employment as an excuse to kind of reflect on one initiative that took shape during COVID called the Working Age Forum, and share some more about that with you, and then go deeper into some reflections about employment, but really thinking about the topic of challenge and how, when life changes, can we find a way to adapt and thrive. So Jack's helping me with slides, as I can't see them. So Jack, keep me on track. We'll start with this concept of seasons changing. So perhaps you could think in your own minds about how your seasons of life have changed. We know that the season definitely changed big time during COVID for all of us. And context really does matter. It's important that we acknowledge the change in seasons. Why? Because in the end, our needs change. Back in my own journey with work, I started out in a bank in London as an eager, enthusiastic, optimistic Irish fella in my first job. And I could see fine. I didn't need to go to the eye hospital in London for any particular reason. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't wear glasses. I was there in my first job using a computer like everyone else and felt like everyone else. But the context changed. About 20 years ago, I started to struggle with using a computer. You know that place where you're starting to bring yourself closer and closer to the screen? Then you can't do that anymore. You're almost climbing on the desk to see what is on the screen, and you know other people are looking at you. And there I was in 2003, struggling, starting to struggle, not wanting to acknowledge what was going on. It was too hard, too scary, not wanting to go near an eye doctor, an optician, not wanting any kind of diagnosis, certainly not wanting to discuss it with my colleagues or my boss for that matter. And you know, when I look back now, my context was changing. And perhaps for many of you, you can identify with that in your own lives, whether it's sight loss or another challenge where, you know, the season changes. The season changes. We go from being able to do something to not being able to do it so easily. And our needs do change. And on the next slide, I discovered, looking back, there was a time to react. You know, when the seasons changed, for me, I fell into this reptilian mind. You know, we all have this reptilian mind. It's very short term. It's that fight, flight, or freeze that we do. It's just natural to us, right? It's not just people from Monaghan who do this. Everyone, we all do it. We go straight into reptilian mode. That's part of our wiring. It's the fight, it's the flight, it's the freeze. I was frozen. I was trying to cover this up to compensate. I was trying to fight fire drills all the time. And when I look back now, I can see how with time, very, very slowly, and it wasn't easy, but with time, I shifted. And there was a need to shift because it was actually a response that I needed to find. Many of us struggle, right? It takes time, it takes months, it can take years to shift from that initial natural reactiveness to figuring out how do we respond. And you know, values are really the lighthouse that can guide us towards a response. So in my case, what actually helped me to respond were my values. I wanted to enjoy my work. I wanted to work hard. I wanted to learn. I wanted to thrive. And eventually, I got worn out with the fire drills. I got worn out with the anger I felt inside, with the covering up, with the just coping. Eventually, I got worn out. And these values were the things that eventually pushed me into a response and out of reaction. And you know, maybe in any challenge we face in our lives, beyond disability or health conditions, that's the shift that we ultimately need to make in time. And even as organizations, we all know this. In places we've worked before, perhaps it's a research institution, perhaps a place we're teaching, working, volunteering, things go wrong. Life changes, and we do go into reactive mode. We do have fire drills, we get angry, there's some covering up we need to do just to cope and survive. But eventually, if we tap into our values, they're what can guide us, help us shift out of that reactiveness into a more responsive place. So there is a time to react on our journey, but eventually there comes a time to respond, and respond based on our values. And there's a lovely quote I included here from Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor. Between stimulus and response, there lies a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that space is really what we're after. Not to react, but actually come to a place where we can reflect, ask ourselves, what's our values as individuals going through this journey of sight loss? Like for many of us, it's a progressive, long journey. What's our journey as an organization, whatever organization we might be part of? what are our values and how do we find the space to respond in a way that honors those values. And with that, it makes me think of another quote from Khalil Gibran on the next slide. You know, what's this point of values really? Well, values are what help us to give meaning to challenge. You know, we get to coat, if you like, or endue our challenges with some kind of meaning. Khalil Gibran said, "Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven?" So for all of us with our challenges in life, be it sight loss or other, we know what that fire can feel like. You know, when things get tough, we've heard on the testimonies there just before how many different scenarios in life can be difficult when you have progressive sight loss. We know that happens in our place of employment, it can happen at home, it can happen anywhere. That burn that you feel, I know I've felt it many times. It's hard to be in that fire. It's hard to keep coming back to that place of challenge. And yet, don't forget that the cup that's in that potter's oven, that is being burned somewhat, is also the cup that can hold the wine. In other words, there can be a gift. There can be a gift. And in the end, if we think about the challenges we face in our individual life, in our journey of sight loss, other challenges, what might be the meaning? What might be the gift that we can find? What might be the meaning that we can choose to make sense of these hard times and to ultimately adapt and to thrive? And so what I'd like to leave you with is a sense from my own journey in employment, struggling with that scenario back 20 years ago, just one example of how this encounter with loss is indeed a challenge, and for many of us, it's a difficult one. And yet, there's a chance to respond with values. There's a chance to consider what meaning might lie in that challenge. And so coming back to employment, and Jack might flip back to, I think, an earlier slide on the Working Age Forum, I'd love to share an invitation. It's a small invitation with you. Just like Fighting Blindness was set up with patients at its heart, with members at its heart, we started a Working Age Forum back at the start of COVID. It's a member-led peer support group on the topic of employment, and it's a chance for us to share ideas and practices with each other, to meet people who are blind or visually impaired from around the country, and we meet online, making it as accessible as we can. And with that, there's a chance every second month on the last Tuesday to come together, to share our journeys around this place of encounter, the place of employment, to share ideas, to share practices with each other, and to try to help each other navigate that difficult world which is full of so many barriers. The small invitation is, why don't you join us? If you would like to contribute, if you would like to find support, you'll see the advertisements coming out on Fighting Blindness, NCBI, social media challenges. We'd love to have you join us bi-monthly on the last Tuesday of each month. So at the end of November, the 29th, we'll be meeting online. We'd love to have you with us. That's the small invitation. The much bigger invitation is this. Michael last year mentioned in the online conference how darkness was what was surrounding those founder members in that first meeting. This sense of darkness, this sense of perhaps even despair, and yet rather than cursing the darkness, Michael and the founders chose to find a candle and light the candle. So the bigger invitation is, in the context that we find ourselves in our own lives as individuals, with sight loss, with other health conditions, with any other type of challenge, we can indeed find ourselves in the dark. And the big invitation is, see where the candle is, find the candle, ask for a candle and light that candle, because your lived experience matters a great deal. Look at Fighting Blindness and the progress it's made over 39 years. That's been driven by the voice of patients, driven by the voice of those like myself, like many of us in the room and online, with lived experience of sight loss and blindness. And there is so much power in that experience. With that, thank you for your time. I wish you a good day today. And as you leave the sessions today in this public engagement day, if you're not a member of Fighting Blindness, join Fighting Blindness. Reach for a candle with this organization. If you're specifically interested in support around employment, there are many different places to go. I invite you to join us in our Working Age Forum as another place to light some candles, and together we can build our resilience. Thank you.
Stay a minute, Brent. Just stay a minute. We'll take a question. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, that's a fine food for thought.